I never forgot that morning, not because of what they said, but because of how they said it. Sharp, cold, precise, like a speech they had rehearsed a dozen times. The main conference room of Helix Dynamics sat on the 42nd floor, its glass walls overlooking the entire Silicon Harbor. Sunlight bounced off the water and scattered across the ceiling, so bright that everyone had to squint. Everyone except me. I was used to that light. I had lived in it for 6 years. Helix was where I had poured my youth into building what I believed to be the future of artificial intelligence, CentraCore. I wrote every line of code, designed every layer of the algorithm, and signed my name on 20 patents tied to the platform. But when Helix was acquired by a major investment fund, they brought in a new CEO, Adrian Kessler. He had once been my mentor at the Institute, the man who taught me to see technology as a living organism. Back then, I thought I owed him everything. Turns out I was just another completed project. That morning, Adrian sat at the head of the table, his suit buttoned neatly, his black tie perfectly centered. When I walked in, he didn't look up. I knew what that meant. Everyone else did too, but no one spoke. The only sounds were the steady hum of the air conditioner and the projector's faint whirring. Adrian began without preamble. Helix Dynamics will proceed with a restructuring of the Strategic Research Division. The change takes effect immediately. He paused, then delivered the final line in a voice as flat as the printed page. Elara Wynn, your position as Chief AI Architect is terminated effective today. For a few seconds, I could hear a pen drop. No one dared to raise their head. I looked around the room, the faces of people I had worked alongside through countless nights, people I had defended through previous layoffs, now all staring down at their laps. I didn't feel anger, only emptiness. It was a strange sensation, like watching myself from outside my body, seeing another version of Alara being erased from that room while I stood still, silent. Adrian closed the folder in front of him, his movements so precise that I could hear the faint brush of paper against paper. You'll receive details from HR by the end of the day. We appreciate your contributions. That last sentence sounded like a line used to end a dull business lunch. No warmth, no sincerity. I shut my laptop and stacked my notes. No one looked at me, but I could feel their eyes, a mix of fear and pity. In my head, memories flashed like a reel, long nights in the lab, the clatter of keys, simulation screens glowing red when the system finally stabilized. Everything I once took pride in, now reduced to 12 simple words. I rose from my chair. The sound of the wheels turning made the entire room freeze. I walked slowly toward the door, my heels tapping against the wood floor. At the threshold, I turned back toward Adrian. He hadn't moved, still pretending to read his documents. I said quietly but clearly, "Watch me." Two short words dropped into the silence like a stone hitting calm water. No one spoke. I saw Adrian lift his head, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he gave a small, dismissive smile, the kind of smile people wear when they think they've already won. I didn't answer. I simply pushed the door open and walked out. The hallway on the 42nd floor was long and bright. Each glass panel reflected my figure, a woman in a gray coat, laptop in hand, walking tall and composed. I saw myself in those reflections. Not broken, not angry, just steady. Something inside me shifted, sharp and certain. This wasn't the end. When the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Adrian through the narrowing gap. He was turning back to the table, saying something to the directors. A few gave awkward smiles, and others shook their heads. The doors sealed shut. Silence. Only the faint hum of the elevator remained. I exhaled, slow, deliberate, as if releasing a weight I'd carried for years. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. I felt free. Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt from the bay. I stopped on the front steps, watching people hurry past, umbrellas opening one by one as a thin drizzle began to fall. I pulled my coat tighter and gripped my bag. Inside it, the hard drive containing the original machine learning models of CentraCore. The only thing I took with me, besides my self-respect. I turned into a small cafe on the corner, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window. Through the glass, the Helix building stood tall, the 42nd floor still glowing as if nothing had happened. I opened my notebook and flipped to the last page of my old contract, the one I'd kept a copy of. A small line in the appendix made me smile. In the event of leadership change or project termination, technical ownership shall revert to the original architect. No one at Helix ever asked why I added that clause. They just signed it because they trusted me, and now that trust would cost them everything. I closed the notebook and slipped it back into my bag. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Droplets streamed down the window like falling lines of code. I thought about my last words, "Watch me," and realized it wasn't just defiance. It was a promise. I didn't yet know where I'd go next, but I knew one thing for certain. I still held 20 patents, and Helix had just handed me back full control of them. I stood, left the cafe, and walked into the rain. It was still falling, bright, cold, and full of the quiet potential of a brand new beginning. I left downtown when the sky had already turned gray. The coastal road was cold and empty this season, lit only by the port lights shimmering across the dark water. I drove back to my small apartment in the Southern District, the place I still called my second lab. No one knew I lived there, not even my closest colleagues at Helix. I used to think I kept my address secret for privacy, but now I knew it was the smartest thing I had ever done. I turned on the lights. The apartment came alive with shelves stacked high with blueprints, notes, and rows of hard drives labeled by year. Beside my computer sat a small cactus I had planted when I was still a young engineer. It had grown almost to the size of my hand. It survived even when I forgot to water it for weeks. Maybe I would too. I opened my laptop. Dozens of notifications appeared, news about Helix dismissing strategic positions to optimize performance, followed by comments on tech forums. No one mentioned my name, only vague guesses under anonymous accounts. Maybe Elara Wynn refused the commercialization direction. People always guess. They never understand. My inbox was full of unread messages. There were bland check-ins, awkward apologies from former coworkers. I scrolled down and stopped at one name, Logan. He had been my lead tester, the only one who ever dared to challenge me about data structures. His message contained just 3 words: "They're looking for you." I typed back, "Who?" But the cursor kept blinking without a reply. A minute later, an anonymous email arrived. No subject line. The message was a single sentence: "You built the key. They're already looking for it." I stared at the glowing text on the screen, my pulse pounding, my mind blank for a few seconds. I got up and paced the room. No one but me knew Centricore had 2 layers of ownership. The first belonged to Helix, the one they flaunted to investors. The second, deeper one, sat under a separate legal entity I had formed 3 years earlier when the board began interfering with the company's direction. Redline Research, a name no one remembered except me and the lawyer I hired to sign the paperwork. I hadn't hidden it. The clause was clearly stated in the appendix. No one at Helix ever bothered to read that far. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still shaking. Back when I worked there, I'd often hear Adrian say, "I don't need to understand everything. I need results." That line sent chills down my spine every time I recalled it. He never understood that technology isn't just about results. It's power. And I was the only one who still held the key. I opened my archive folder and pulled up the contract signed on August 14th, 3 years ago. The final line appeared thin as a thread across the page. In the event of leadership change or project cancellation, all patents and copyrights shall remain with the original architect until reintegration. I read it 3 times, each word glowing brighter. Under the lamp. Part of me felt relief. The rest tightened with dread. I didn't know how Helix would react if they discovered the truth. They might sue, accuse me of theft, but they couldn't deny what they had signed. I needed to be careful. The phone rang, sharp and sudden. Unknown number. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Elara Wynn? A male voice, rough and low. I stayed silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Who is this?" He cut in. "Don't stay alone. They're discussing a data search on you." Then the line went dead. I sat motionless for a long time. Adrian's face appeared in my mind, that polite yet cutting smile. I knew he wouldn't stop at firing me. Adrian saw people as tools, and he would do whatever it took to reclaim what he believed was his. I began backing up the entire Redline database onto two new drives, encrypting each segment with my own algorithms. Old habits returned. My hands moved fast, precise, every command executed like muscle memory. When the progress bar finally hit 100%, I looked at the clock. It was past midnight. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. The city was silent, unnervingly so. I stepped onto the balcony. The sea was pitch black, the water reflecting thin lines of golden light from the harbor. I took a deep breath. The fear had faded, replaced by an eerie focus. I understood clearly that I wasn't just guarding a piece of technology. I was holding a strategic weapon Helix never saw coming. I looked down at the hard drive in my hand, its small green light blinking softly. 6 years of work, every sleepless night, now contained in this tiny object. I set it on the desk, opened my laptop, and started drafting a summary of ownership to send to my lawyer in the morning. The room filled with the steady rhythm of typing, punctuated by the whisper of wind through the window crack. Around 3 in the morning, I stopped. On the screen, the final line of the document appeared. Redline Research, sole proprietary owner of Centra Core Intellectual Framework. I saved the file and shut the computer. Leaning back in my chair, I closed my eyes. Adrian's voice echoed in my mind. Technology is power. He was right, but only partly. Power doesn't belong to the one with the highest title. It belongs to the one who understands the system from within. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. The sky was turning pale. The second day had begun, and I knew Helix hadn't yet realized that the game they started yesterday had only just begun. On the ninth morning after I was fired, Helix Dynamics held the global launch of the new Centra Core. The event streamed live across every major platform, drawing hundreds of thousands of views within minutes. I hadn't planned to watch, yet curiosity won when Adrian Kessler's name flooded the headlines. He stood on stage with a massive screen behind him, projecting a three-dimensional animation of the system. White spotlights washed over his neatly combed silver hair. His voice carried through the speakers, steady and full of confidence. The future of Helix, he said, has entered a new chapter. With the updated version of CentraCore, we will redefine what artificial intelligence automation means. Applause burst from the front rows where investors and government officials sat upright, waiting for their show. I stared at Adrian's face, remembering how he once said those exact words 3 years ago in the lab when I was still the only one writing code. The difference was, back then, his word actually meant something. Now it was just an empty shell. I told myself not to care, but when he stepped toward the control panel and pressed the activation key, I froze. The screen flared bright. Charts began to move, then abruptly stopped. A short beep echoed. A faint line of text appeared in the corner of the screen. License authorization expired. The entire hall fell silent. Adrian's brow twitched. He forced a smile and gestured for calm. Into the microphone, he said, "Just a small glitch. 2 minutes." Yet 2 minutes passed, then 5, then 10. The screen remained frozen, that sentence glowing sharper under the stage lights. I tilted my head slightly, realizing my lips had curved into a quiet smile. They were running on the very platform I had locked 8 days ago, the one bound to Redline's ownership clause. Naturally, the system could not launch without the original key. And that key was mine. On the broadcast, the audio crackled. A technician rushed up and whispered something to Adrian. The camera zoomed in close, sweat beading on his forehead. An operations director tried to mask his panic, but the microphone caught his voice. "We can't access it. All licenses are invalid." The line slipped into the live feed and spread across social media within minutes. I sat back on the sofa watching the screen, taking a sip of cold coffee. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part felt heavy. I had dreamed of seeing CentraCore introduced to the world, just not like this. My creation was being humiliated by the same people who once called me indispensable. The broadcast was cut midway. When it returned, Adrian was trying to regain control. He spoke in his practiced calm. "We've identified the issue, a minor authentication module error. Nothing serious. But everyone in the industry knew better. There was no such error that could simultaneously expire every license. That only happened when root authorization was revoked from the top." I opened my computer. and logged into the old internal network. To my surprise, I still had access. Someone in IT must have forgotten to delete my account. The team chat window glowed. Logan's message popped up. Elara, what's happening? The system shows a global license error. I didn't answer. Another message appeared from Priya. They say the whole team's getting fired. We've been locked out of the servers. I read their words, then typed slowly, "Stay calm. It's not your fault." Then I signed out without waiting for a reply. Outside the window, the afternoon light was fading. From my apartment, I could see the Helix Tower glowing in the distance, blazing like it was burning itself with its own neon. Inside, I could almost picture Adrian yelling into a phone, his tie crooked, voice hoarse with anger, eyes darting from person to person like every one of them was to blame. I reopened the ownership file and scrolled to the line bearing his signature. Approved by CEO, Adrian Kessler. That signature now looped around Helix's throat like a tightening rope. I hadn't meant to destroy them. I simply refused to let them steal what wasn't theirs. They had done this to themselves. By evening, the headlines flooded every feed. Helix Dynamics suffers a major technical failure during the global launch. Centracore offline. Investors in panic. Helix shares plunge 40% in 3 hours. I read each line, feeling no thrill of revenge, only a quiet ache. I knew too well what the engineers still there must be feeling, the helplessness, the fear. They didn't deserve to be caught in this war. My phone buzzed. A new message, no name attached. You started it. Now finish it. I reread it several times, then deleted it. I didn't know who sent it, but whoever it was seemed to understand me better than I wanted to admit. I stepped out onto the balcony. The city glowed below, the sea calm and unaware that a giant corporation was crumbling piece by piece. The wind rose, carrying salt and mist. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves crash against the rocks. The feeling of victory wasn't sweet, it was sharp, cold, metallic. But I knew this was only the beginning. Adrian would never accept defeat. He would strike back. And when he did, I had to be ready. I went back inside, turned on the computer, and began drafting a legal report for Redline in case Helix filed a lawsuit. Under the warm light, the words stretched across the screen. Outside, the night grew thick. Only the blue glow from my monitor lit my face. A new chapter was beginning. For both of us, there was no turning back. The next morning, I woke as pale light slipped through the thin curtain. I hadn't slept at all. My mind kept replaying the image of Adrian on that stage, trying to salvage a launch that had already collapsed. The headlines filled every feed. The biggest system crash in AI history. Helix Dynamics is suspected of losing ownership rights. I didn't feel joy, only a heavy quietness closing in. In this world, people who fail never stay buried. They strike back. When I finished brewing coffee, there was a knock at the door. A man in a black suit and silver glasses stood in the hallway holding a leather briefcase. "Elara Wynn?" he asked, his voice low and firm. I nodded. He handed me an envelope stamped with the Helix Dynamics logo and smiled politely. "I represent Helix's legal team. The company requests your cooperation in an investigation into intellectual property violations and damage to corporate assets." His tone was steady, detached, the way someone might read a death notice. I opened the letter in front of him. The bold header read, "Preliminary Lawsuit Notice." I folded it, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "I don't answer without my attorney." He gave a small shrug. "You can do whatever you like, but Helix won't let this go." Then he turned away, leaving behind the sting of his cologne in the air. I stood still for a moment, then let out a quiet laugh. The war had officially begun. I opened my laptop and launched my private security network, Sentinel Node, a system I'd built to detect unauthorized access. A digital map appeared, scattered with glowing points marking active connections. 2 of them flashed red, intrusions, both traced back to Helix. I typed a command. The line appeared on screen. "Intrusion detected. Isolating process." The code scrolled fast, then stopped. I had locked them out, but only for now. I knew Adrian wouldn't crumble after one failure. He played the long game, legal, technical, psychological. I checked my inbox and found 3 new messages from Redline. They warned that Helix was preparing a criminal case, accusing me of stealing proprietary data. I replied briefly, "Let them. We have proof." Even as I typed, my hands trembled slightly. I understood the law. Being right didn't guarantee I would win. By noon, the phone rang. Blocked number. I almost ignored it, but the voice stopped me. "Elara? It's Dylan from the old engineering team. I can't talk long. They're trying to recover the source code from the backup servers. Someone said Adrian hired private hackers." His voice shook, mixed with uneven breathing. "Be careful. They might know you hold the master rights." Then the line went dead. I sat frozen, heart pounding. A chill spread from my palms to my throat. I reopened Sentinel Node to trace the signal. A strange tag appeared: Helix External Probe 47. When I clicked it, a high-level alert flashed. They were breaching my firewall, using an old internal algorithm, one only my former team would know, which meant someone had turned. My chest tightened. It felt like losing something more precious than data. By late afternoon, I walked to the shore. The sky was gray, the wind sharp, waves crashing hard against the rocks. I needed air, but the feeling of being watched clung to me. Adrian's face flashed through my mind. He always pushed people to the edge and smiled when they broke. I couldn't make that mistake. He wanted me angry, reckless. I clenched my fists and forced myself to be calm. When I returned, my apartment door was slightly open. I was certain I had locked it. I stepped inside, heart hammering. Everything looked mostly untouched, except that the desk drawer was open and papers were scattered. Nothing was missing, but I understood the message. We can get in any time. I sat down and checked the security feed. The camera showed a man in black with gloves inside for less than 2 minutes. He didn't steal, he searched. I called my lawyer and reported it. Her voice was tight. "Elara, you should leave the city. Adrian has enough influence to turn this into a federal case if you're not careful." I answered slowly, "I'm not running. Running means guilt." Then I hung up. That night, Helix released a new press statement. Adrian appeared, his face pale, his eyes still razor sharp. Helix Dynamics will cooperate with federal authorities to investigate external sabotage. I watched him speak, his lips moving with that same faint smile. "You're good, Adrian. Just like before, when you taught me how to make a room believe you were innocent." I turned off the TV and sat in the dark. Around 3 in the morning, an unfamiliar sound jolted the silence. A breach alert. I rushed to my computer and saw the code streaming nonstop. Someone was trying to break the final encryption layer of Redline. I typed fast, command after command, until the last line appeared: "Access terminated." I fell back into the chair, cold sweat down my spine. This time, it wasn't a test. They were trying to take it. The blue glow of the monitor washed over my face. I realized I was standing exactly where Adrian once stood, controlling a system too powerful to ever feel safe. I closed my eyes and drew a slow breath. No fear. Fear was what he wanted. All I needed was focus. Outside, the wind screamed through the window frame. I typed a quick note to myself. When they attack, it means they're losing control. I saved it, then looked out across the city. Far away, the Helix Tower still blazed through the night like a dying steel creature. I whispered, "If this is your game, Adrian, I'll play it to the end." Day 10 began like that, in silence, with the taste of salt in the air and the blue light of the screen. The only thing left I could trust. 3 days after the break-in, I barely slept. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, surrounded by the glow of monitors and the soft hum of cooling fans. Outside, Helix stayed loud, but the tone of the news began to shift. The question was no longer what happened. It was who did it. I knew that sooner or later, my name would surface. I tried to keep my routine: coffee, data checks, Sentinel updates, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger each day. Every time I passed the window, I felt eyes on me. I couldn't prove it, but instinct told me Helix was tightening its net. That afternoon, a package arrived with no sender listed. Inside was a small black flash drive, unmarked. I plugged it into an isolated computer with no network access. The screen flickered, playing a single 3-minute video. A young Helix engineer, I recognized him, sat before the camera, pale, eyes fixed straight ahead. His voice trembled. "I don't know anything about it. I was just following orders. Please, I have a family." Then another voice, deep and cold, spoke off camera. "You helped Wynn store the data. We have proof." The video ended there. No screams, no sound, just silence stretching into nothing. I stared at the screen, a chill crawling down my spine. I knew him, Nathan, the one who used to bring sandwiches to the lab at 3 in the morning. My throat went dry. If Helix was interrogating its own staff, it meant Adrian had started playing dirty. I shut the screen and sat motionless. In my mind, I saw Adrian by the glass wall of his office, a glass of wine in hand, watching the city below. He used to tell me, "To survive in this world, Elara, don't feel too much." I had once believed him. Now that very detachment made me sick. That night, I couldn't focus. I sat by the window watching the lights reflect on the water. Guilt looped endlessly in my head. I had saved my work, yes, but maybe I had also put others in danger. Logan, Priya, Dylan, Nathan, they were all people who just wanted to do their jobs. I had left them in the fire I started. I wondered if I had gone too far. Was I becoming the thing I despised? A person using technology as a weapon? In the dark, the wind through the window crack sounded like a whisper from my conscience. Around midnight, the phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Elara Wynn?" A man's voice, calm and familiar. "You might not remember me. I'm Miles Carter." I froze. Miles had been Helix's head of R&D, dismissed by Adrian after he opposed the mass layoffs. "I heard Helix is hunting you," he said, "and I'm guessing you're not running." I gave a dry laugh. "You guessed right. I've got nothing left to lose." Miles was quiet for a moment. "Wrong," he said softly. "You have what they can't buy. Time and intellect. Don't waste it on revenge. They'll collapse on their own if you stand still long enough." I didn't answer. On the other end, the wind hissed through his mic, like a distant warning. "I want to help you," he said, his tone sincere. "I'm running a small company now, Varion Technologies. We have something you need, a way to protect your work without destroying anyone." I sat there, listening, my thoughts tangled. His words felt like a thread pulling me back from the spiral. After the call ended, I stayed still for a long time. Thunder rolled from the sea. The lamp flickered, reflecting my face on the dark screen. I studied my own eyes, sunken, tired, but within them something had returned. Clarity. I opened the old Helix files. Buried deep in the archives, I found a note Adrian had written back when he was still Chief Technical Officer. "No one can control a system they don't understand." He had been right and wrong. I understood it better than anyone, enough to know when to stop. I ran a full sentinel scan. The report came back clean. No intrusions detected. For the first time in days, my chest loosened. I powered down and leaned back. In my mind, Miles's words echoed, "Don't destroy anyone, just rise above them." I closed my eyes, letting the ocean breeze slip through the window. I thought of the early years, when Adrian had been my mentor. He used to say, "The real power of technology isn't control, it's transformation." I smiled faintly. Maybe he never understood that phrase the way I do now. When I opened my eyes, the sky was brightening. The first rays of sunlight touched the keyboard, scattering silver lines across the steel surface. I knew I had made my choice. I wouldn't run, I wouldn't retaliate, but I also wouldn't let them destroy what I had built. I'd find another way, a place where technology could exist for its true purpose. I stood and opened the window. The sea was still rough, but the sky had cleared. I breathed in the cold air, feeling it expand inside my chest. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape, no longer a weight, but a drive. Day 11 began that way, in the pale light of dawn, with pain still lingering but resolve finally clear. I knew I was stepping out of the shadows, not for vengeance, but for freedom. The next morning, I left my apartment. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the air carried a faint trace of salt from the sea. I hadn't stepped outside in 3 days, but something about this morning pushed me to move. Miles had sent me an address, a small cafe near the old harbor where, as he put it, the signal was never strong and people tended to speak more honestly. I knew he'd chosen it for safety. When I walked in, the bell over the door gave a soft chime. Only a few people sat inside. Most of them were dock workers. Miles was in the far corner, his back to the wall, the window light casting pale lines across his face, worn but steady. He smiled when he saw me, an expression both warm and cautious. "Elara Wynn," he said. "You survived the storm." I took a seat across from him and answered simply, "Because I learned not to trust anyone." For a while, silence filled the space between us, broken only by the sound of a spoon stirring in a cup. Finally, Miles spoke. "Helix is losing control. They need someone to blame, and you're the perfect candidate." I nodded. "I know." They already came to my door, his brow furrowed. "I've heard they hired an independent security firm. You don't have much time." I gave a faint smile. "Did you come here to scare me?" "No," he said quietly. "I came to ask you to walk away from the game." Miles turned his tablet toward me. The logo of Virion Technologies glowed on the screen. I knew the name, a rising startup in clean energy. "We're building a decentralized AI framework," he said. "An open system not owned by any corporation. I want you to lead it." I frowned. "You want me to sell my work?" He shook his head. "I want you to free it." I studied him, uncertain. "You know what I have?" Miles nodded. "Centra Core. I know you still hold the real license key. I worked under Adrian. I know how he operates. Control, suffocation, and then he calls it strategy. But you're different, Elara. You can make technology serve people, not shareholders." I said nothing. The warm light reflected off the coffee surface, trembling slightly. Maybe I was just too tired to keep fighting. But Miles didn't sound like the others, the ones who only saw me as leverage. There was sincerity in his voice, the kind that comes from someone who's lost and still wants to make things right. "If I agree," I said, "I have conditions." He nodded once. I spoke slowly. "This technology will never be used for surveillance, weapons, or data exploitation. If it is, I'll revoke every access key." Miles didn't even pause. "Accepted," he said. "You have my word." We sat quietly again. Outside, the rain began to tap against the metal roof. I looked out the window, feeling something inside me loosen, maybe relief, or just the fragile sense of being seen. For the first time in years, someone wasn't looking at me like an asset, but like a person who still had worth. Before I left, Miles said, "I don't need an answer today, but if you want to end this the right way, come join us. You know Helix won't stop." I nodded, but made no promises. As I stepped out, the wind carried the sharp metallic scent of an approaching storm. I knew I had crossed a threshold, not just surviving anymore, but trying to save what I had built. That afternoon, back at my apartment, my thoughts kept circling. I opened my laptop and rechecked the Redline ownership contract. The final line was still clear. All intellectual rights remain with the original architect until reintegration. I read it over and over, then opened a blank document and typed, "Memorandum of Understanding with Virion Technologies." When I finished, I looked out the window. Rain poured down, blurring the city lights. Adrian's face came back to me, his smug smile the day he fired me, his cold voice echoing, "You're a good tool, but every tool gets replaced." I whispered, "No, Adrian. I'm not a tool anymore. I'm the source." A notification pinged, an email from Miles. "Virion is ready. You just have to say yes." I sat staring at the screen, feeling like I was standing before a path I had never imagined. I could keep hiding, or step back into the light, this time for a different reason. I typed a single line, "I'm in." But I want full control of the core code. After I hit send, I closed my eyes. The wind slipped through the window crack, cold, but somehow kind. For the first time in weeks, I felt no fear. I stepped out onto the balcony. The rain had softened, the air fresh and clean. Far away, the Helix Tower still glowed, its white light cold as steel. I watched it for a long time. I wasn't angry anymore. I just knew one simple truth. Every empire falls, not because of its enemies, but because of its own hunger. I turned back inside and shut the laptop. The dark screen reflected my face. Calm, steady. Maybe I hadn't won, but I was no longer losing. Day 12 ended that way, with a meeting, a silent handshake, and a small decision that carried all the freedom I had once lost. 3 days after I'd agreed to partner with Virion, Sentinel sent its first alert. Unauthorized access detected. Source: internal Helix. I froze. They were still trying to reclaim control, even after multiple failed attempts. But this time was different. The data showed someone using my old ID code. It could only mean one thing: an insider. I opened the monitoring panel. Code streamed down the screen like veins of light. The connection rate spiked so fast I had to shut down all external networks to avoid trace detection. I sat still, listening to the fan's sharp whir. My pulse pounded, but my mind was clear. They were sending decoy pings, an old trick to bait my real location. Adrian wasn't stupid, just arrogant enough to think I'd slip. I fired a counter command and activated the secondary firewall. The screen flashed. Access blocked. Traceback initiated. Within 30 seconds, I had the source. Helix headquarters, 41st floor, R&D division. My old office. Seeing that number sting. 6 years of my life spent on that floor, writing code, building systems, dreaming. Now they were using my own creation to hunt me down. I wondered how many of them knew the truth or if they were just following orders. Silent, scared, waiting to disappear. That afternoon, Miles called. Elara, are you okay? Helix just released a new accusation. I opened my tablet. The headline read, Helix Dynamics accuses former chief engineer of stealing intellectual property, threatening national security. I exhaled slowly. I guess Adrian finally played his last card. Miles replied, Not exactly. When people shout that loud, it means they're losing control. I stayed quiet. He continued, We're ready. If you transfer the core to Virion's servers, we can legitimize ownership within 24 hours. I hesitated. Doing that will make Helix see it as open hostility. Miles spoke gently. They already see you as the enemy. The only thing left is when you decide to stand up. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Exhaustion pressed down on me. I didn't want revenge, but I couldn't let Helix twist my work again. If Adrian wanted a war, I'd end it through law, not destruction. That night, I began the transfer. The full Redline dataset moved to Virion's encrypted network, a process that took 3 hours. When the progress bar hit 100%, I felt my chest ease. It was the first real step toward reclaiming everything I'd built. At 3 in the morning, an anonymous email arrived. The subject line said only, They know. Inside was a single attachment, a still frame from Helix's internal camera feed. Adrian sat in the boardroom, the directors around him. He was pointing at a projection of my old interview from 6 years ago. Beneath it, a note read, Target, neutralize Elara Wynn before she signs with the rival. My hands tightened around the tablet, a chill spreading up my spine. He didn't just want to sue me. He wanted to destroy me. I knew. What would come next? The media. By morning, it exploded. National broadcasts ran the headline, Helix Dynamics accuses ex-engineer of sabotaging a $6 billion AI system. They used old footage of me, cold face, steady eyes, edited under the words, The Insider. Comment sections are filled with thousands of threats and insults demanding my arrest. I turned off the screen and sat in the darkness. No one wanted to hear my truth. They only heard the voice that had power. That was the first lesson I ever learned in this world. Truth always loses to the camera. By mid-afternoon, Miles called again. Elara, we're ready. If you approve, we'll publish Redline's verified ownership today. I looked out the window. The sky was dark, the sea rising in waves. Do it, I said. If Adrian wants to drag me into the light, I'll step into it, but not as the villain. I'll step in as the creator. An hour later, the internet flipped. Virion's official account posted, Centra Core, exclusive AI framework of Redline Research, under the rightful ownership of original architect Elara Wynn. Attached was the verified documentation from the International Patent Authority. The post spread like wildfire. Within 2 hours, Helix fired back, accusing Virion of data theft. But public opinion had split. People started asking, if Helix truly owns it, why does the license bear Wynn's name? Investors who'd stayed silent began calling for an independent audit. That night, I sat in my apartment, the light of thousands of messages flickering across my face. Logan wrote, "I'm proud of you." They deserve to be exposed. Priya sent one single emoji, a flame. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years, but I knew Adrian wasn't finished. Helix never dies quietly. Close to midnight, Sentinel triggered an emergency alert. Linked data from Helix is being erased. I opened the console. The chart plunged downward. Adrian was purging everything that could tie him to the truth. He wanted to erase my existence from Helix's history. I leaned back, watching the data vanish line by line. A strange sadness washed over me. 6 years of work, thousands of hours, gone in minutes. But unlike before, I didn't feel despair. I felt calm. Because this time, I owned something he could never delete, the right to tell my story. Day 15 ended in heavy rain. Outside, the sea roared, and I knew Helix was only thrashing in the storm they had built themselves. On the 16th day after I was fired, the call I'd been expecting finally came. The screen showed no name, only 4 digits, 4141. I recognized them immediately. That was Helix's executive line. I hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. Elara Wynn. Adrian's voice came through, low, rough, still holding that familiar rhythm of control. "You've created a disaster," he said. "I want to hear from your own mouth why." I stayed silent, watching the blue glow of the monitor cast faint light across the wall. "I didn't create anything, Adrian," I said calmly. "I just stopped you from stealing more." On the other end, his breathing grew heavier. "You think I'll let this go? You're playing with power you don't understand." I let out a dry laugh. "Don't understand? I wrote every line of CentraCore's code. I know its heartbeat better than you ever will. You're the one who doesn't understand the power you're trying to control." He was quiet for a few seconds. Then his tone softened, too measured to be sincere. "Elara, you can still come back. I'll drop every charge. We can negotiate. I know you're brilliant, and I still respect that." I stared at the screen, picturing his face, calm on the outside, but his eyes must have been burning. "Respect?" I said. "If you respected me, you wouldn't have erased my name from every record or reduced 6 years of work to a footnote in your quarterly report." His voice hardened. "You're destroying the company that gave you everything." I replied softly but steadily. "No, Adrian, I'm taking back its soul." Silence stretched long and thin. Then he spoke again. "If you go public one more time, I'll end you. Your career, your reputation. I've lived in this world long enough to know justice doesn't belong to truth. It belongs to whoever has more money." I smiled faintly, not because I found it funny, but because he had finally said what I'd been waiting for. "You still don't get it," I said. "Money can buy silence, but it can't buy trust. And trust is what's slipping away from Helix, minute by minute." Then I hung up. An hour later, Miles called. "Helix just issued an emergency order. They're demanding that all Redline licenses be revoked." I said, "They'll fail. Every patent is internationally registered." Miles replied, "True, but they can stall the Virion project through lawsuits." I looked out the window, the wind cutting across the sea. Then we speed up. The next 3 days blurred into endless work, meetings, and decisions. I moved into Virion's temporary headquarters, a modest glass-walled building overlooking a field of turbines. No luxury, no pretense, just energy and focus. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again, surrounded by people who believed in creation, not control. The Virion team welcomed me, like someone returning from a battlefield. They knew I wasn't a hero, just someone who survived. In their eyes, I saw respect without fear, a rare thing, and this industry. Together, Miles and I worked day and night on the next evolution, Ethernet, a decentralized network immune to ownership or manipulation. On launch day, Virion streamed live to the world. I stood on a small stage, No blinding lights, just a quiet backdrop and a slow turning logo behind me. Miles gave a short introduction and handed the mic to me. The room fell silent as I stepped forward. "I'm not here to retell a war," I began, my voice steady. "I'm here to talk about freedom. For 6 years, I watched technology turn into a weapon, twisted by greed and control. But those of us who build it still have a choice. We can bring it back to serve humanity." I paused, looking straight into the lens. Ethernet doesn't belong to me or to Virion. It belongs to everyone, and this time, no one can take it away. When I finished, the room stayed silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause. Miles caught my eye and gave a small nod. In that moment, I knew we had won, not just the project, but the right to believe again. That night, an email arrived from an unnamed address. "You won." No signature, but I knew the tone. Cold, precise, down to every period. Adrian. Maybe he had finally understood that the game was over. News spread fast. Helix's stock dropped, another 60%. The board forced Adrian to resign. In a brief press conference, he said only one line: "I was wrong to believe power could control trust." I watched the clip in silence. No triumph, no anger, just a quiet release, like wind passing through open air. I thought back to that morning when I'd said thank you as they fired me. If I'd shouted or broken down like so many others, I might have vanished like them. But that single word, thank you, had kept me calm long enough to reach this day. As the sun set behind the wind farms, I stepped onto the balcony. The air whipped through my hair, carrying the scent of salt and metal. Far off, the sea glowed red under the last light. I replayed it all: the humiliation in that conference room, the lonely nights by the desk, the call from Miles, the quiet handshake, and now, the stillness of victory. I no longer belonged to Helix or to any company. I belonged to the path I had chosen, where technology and humanity no longer stood on opposite sides. Day 20 ended like that, with no smoke, no noise, only a clean, unshakable truth. I had taken everything back, not through force, but through truth itself. 14 days. Only 14 days since I was fired in that freezing glass room. Such a short span that if someone told the story, no one would believe it was enough time for a person to lose everything and take it all back. But I knew better. Every hour, every minute of those days had been carved into me like a scar that would never fade. This morning I woke early, sunlight spilling across my new apartment on the coast. The sound of waves in the distance was steady, like a heartbeat. Standing in front of the mirror, I saw my face without tension for the first time in weeks. I tied my hair, slipped on a light coat, and stepped outside. No security, no cameras, just me, the road, and a calm light that felt, finally, no longer hostile. As I walked along the shoreline, my phone rang. Miles. He didn't waste words. Ethernet has been officially approved. We're recognized as the world's first open AI network. I stopped, letting the wind brush against my face. No cheers, no tears, just a stillness spreading through me. Good, I said. Now it truly belongs to everyone. I sat on the stone steps by the sea. Everything replayed like a slow film. The meeting at Helix, Adrian's cold eyes, the first night I caught their intrusion, the call from Miles, the small stage where I spoke about freedom. Each moment had been a stone I once tripped over, but now, together, they formed the path that led me here. I opened my laptop and checked my inbox. Hundreds of emails, interview requests, collaboration offers, apologies from people who had once stayed silent. But my eyes stopped on one name: Adrian Kessler. Subject line: the last time. I hesitated, then opened it. Win. You won. I'm not writing to justify myself, only to admit that I forgot what mattered most, why I started. I thought I was protecting Helix, but I was only protecting my ego. You did what I couldn't. Let go. Keep the technology safe. Don't let it fall into the hands of people like me. AK. I read it several times, then closed the laptop. There was no hatred left in me, only understanding. I had once despised him, But now I saw a reflection of my own past, a person who once believed control was the only way to protect what they created. That afternoon, I returned to Virion's office. Miles and the engineers were waiting. On the wall, a large screen glowed with a single message: Ethernet V190 live. Beneath it, a global map shimmered with thousands of connection points spreading across continents. I watched them like stars. It's begun, Miles said softly, as if afraid to disturb the moment. I nodded. And this time, no one can erase it. He smiled. You just ended a war without firing a single shot. I answered. I only needed time. 14 days. The room filled with quiet laughter. No one said more. We just watched the lights moving across the map, witnessing the birth of something new. When the screen dimmed, Miles turned to me. What will you do next? I paused for a moment. I think I'll leave the city for a while. This technology doesn't need me anymore. It'll grow on its own. I want to live for real, not through a screen. He nodded, no questions asked. That night, I went home. The sea was calm. I sat by the window, watching the lights of distant boats flicker like drifting embers. I pressed record, not to send anyone, but to keep for myself. Day 14. I, Elara Wynn, left Helix, lost everything, and found it all again. I didn't seek revenge. I simply kept my promise that technology should never betray humanity. I think of those who walked beside me: Logan, Priya, Nathan, Miles. I think of Adrian, who forced me to choose between anger and freedom. And I chose freedom. If anyone hears this, remember, power can be stolen, reputation can be destroyed, but knowledge, once shared, never dies. I stopped the recording and saved the file under a single name. 14 days. A memory. A reminder. When the clock struck 11:59, I turned off the lights. The city still glowed, but I wasn't afraid of its brightness anymore. Somewhere out there, young engineers were writing the first new lines of Ethernet, believing the world could change. I smiled. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the scent of salt. I stepped onto the balcony and looked up. The clouds had cleared, and the moon was out. My shadow stretched long across the cold floor. I whispered, barely audible, "Thank you for firing me. Not out of spite, but truth." Without that day, there would be no me today. I breathed deep and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, peace felt real. No data, no meetings, no one left to prove anything to. Just me. A person without title, without power, but free. And that's how the story ends. Not with applause, not with vengeance, but with the quiet beauty of someone who rose from the ashes, carrying the simple belief that sometimes the strongest thing we can do is begin again. 14 days. One nod. One new life.